The cool marble of the penthouse floor felt like ice against Clara's skin, but it was nothing compared to the heat of Ha-Jun's gaze. She sat on the edge of the velvet couch, her fingers trembling as they clutched the delicate white lace of her lingerie. Ha-Jun stood over her, a shirtless silhouette of ink and muscle, the dragon tattoos on his chest seemingly alive in the golden ambient light. "Spread your legs wide, Clara," he commanded, his voice a low, dangerous gravel that vibrated through the silent room. He knelt between her knees, his large hand possessively gripping her thigh, his thumb tracing the hem of her lace. "I want to have a complete taste of the woman who thinks she can hide secrets in my house." Clara's breath hitched, her head tilting back as his other hand came up to tangle in her afro-coily hair. "Master, please," she exhaled, caught between terror and a desire she couldn't name. He didn't move. He only tightened his hold, his dark eyes searching hers for a lie. 2 hours ago, she had been just his maid, a silent shadow cleaning the bloodstains of his lifestyle. 2 hours ago, she'd found the flash drive that proved his own lieutenant, Jinho, was planning a coup. When Ha-Jun had cornered her, demanding to know why a girl from Nigeria would risk her life for a monster like him, the truth had finally broken through her fear. "Because I can't let them destroy you," she whispered now, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Ha-Jun lowered his face to the crook of her neck, his lips grazing her skin. "I don't need your protection, Clara," he growled, caging her body with his own. "I need your loyalty. I need to know that when the world burns tonight, you'll be the one standing in the ashes with me. Before we dive in deep into the story, I would love to know what you will do when you find out that your boss, the most dangerous man in the state, a man who everyone fears, was gradually falling in love with you. Drop it in the comments and also subscribe to this channel and stay tuned for more." The golden elevator ascended in a silence so heavy it felt pressurized, delivering Clara into a world of cold marble and glass that overlooked the glittering sprawl of Seoul. 3 months ago, she had stood in the center of Ha-Jun's penthouse, her shadow swallowed by the vastness of the room, feeling less like an employee and more like a specimen under a microscope. Ha-Jun hadn't even looked at her initially. He sat behind a desk of dark obsidian, his presence a suffocating weight that filled every corner of the suite. The rules of her employment were delivered not by him, but by a stern man in a suit who didn't offer a name. They were simple, clinical, and absolute. Clara was to be a ghost. She was to clean, to organize, and to vanish the moment Ha-Jun entered a room. Most importantly, the directive was clear. No eye contact, ever. To Ha-Jun, she wasn't a woman with a history or a heart. She was merely a domestic tool meant to maintain the perfection of his sanctuary. When he finally spoke, his voice was like a blade dragged across silk. "You are from Nigeria," he stated, his eyes still fixed on a folder containing her life's struggles. He finally looked up, and for a fleeting second, the no-eye contact rule was impossible to follow. His gaze was intense and predatory, stripping away her defenses. He saw the desperation she tried to hide, the need to escape the poverty of her past and the weight of the family she left behind. "This is a place of secrets, Clara," he said, his tone devoid of warmth. "If you see something, you forget it. If you hear something, you are deaf. In exchange, you will be paid more than you have ever dreamed." He stood, his lean, athletic frame silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows, and she caught the first glimpse of the black ink creeping up his neck from beneath his collar. For weeks, the penthouse became her golden cage. She moved through the rooms like a spirit, polishing surfaces that were already spotless, always ears strained for the sound of his footsteps, so she could retreat into the shadows. He remained a cold, distant god of this high-altitude realm, never acknowledging her presence even when they occupied the same space. Yet, despite the fear and the strict boundaries, Clara found herself watching him from the corners of her vision, intrigued by the quiet strength and the hidden darkness that seemed to radiate from him. She was a silent observer of a man who ruled with iron, never imagining that the ghost he hired would eventually become the only person he couldn't live without. The heavy, metallic scent of iron was always the first thing to greet Clara when she entered the east wing of the penthouse. It was a smell that didn't belong in a home filled with Italian marble and silk curtains, yet here, it was the primary fragrance of power. Ha-Jun had been gone for 3 hours, leaving the silence of the apartment feeling like a held breath. As she moved through the dimly lit hallway, her soft soles made no sound on the polished floors, a habit she had perfected to remain the silent maid he expected her to be. She entered the private study, where the golden ambient light caught a stray smear of crimson on the edge of a mahogany desk. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands remained steady as she reached for the cleaning cloth. This was the arrangement. She cleaned the mess his life made, and in exchange, she earned the survival of her family back in Lagos. But as she knelt to scrub a dark droplet from the floor, her gaze drifted to the intricate carving of the fireplace vent. Something was caught in the grate, a small, silver shimmer that didn't belong in the shadows. With a quick, cautious glance toward the door, Clara reached out. Her fingers brushed cold metal. She pulled it free, revealing a sleek, nondescript flash drive. In a world of secrets and shadow wars, a piece of plastic like this was often more lethal than a bullet. She knew she should put it back, to pretend she was the invisible servant he hired, but her intuition, the same survival instinct that had brought her across the ocean, screamed that this was the key to the tension she felt vibrating through the penthouse. A maid's curiosity is a very dangerous thing, Clara. The voice was a low, dangerous gravel that seemed to rise from the floorboards themselves. Clara froze, the drive clutched tightly in her palm. She didn't have to turn to know Ha-Jun was there. She could feel the sudden drop in temperature, the predatory weight of his presence caging the air around her. She turned slowly, rising to her feet to find him standing in the doorway. He had shed his jacket and shirt, his upper body bare and glistening with a light sheen of sweat. The black ink of the tattoos covering his chest and arms seemed to writhe in the flickering light of the study. He looked less like a corporate CEO and more like the ruthless Mafia boss the rumors promised, a man of cold precision and intense secrets. "I was just cleaning, master," she whispered, her voice betraying the silent maid facade she had maintained for months. Ha-Jun stepped into the room, his movements fluid and predatory. He didn't stop until he was inches away, his towering frame forcing her to look up, her natural afro-coily hair brushing against the marble wall behind her. He reached out, his thumb and forefinger tilting her chin upward, forcing her to meet his dark, unreadable eyes. "You weren't cleaning," he countered, his gaze dropping to her closed fist. "You were hunting, and now you've found something that could get you killed before the sun rises." He pried her fingers open with terrifying ease, taking the drive from her hand. But instead of the cold dismissal she expected, his expression shifted into something more complex, a dark, possessive intrigue. His hand didn't pull away. Instead, he let his palm rest against the side of her neck, his thumb tracing the frantic pulse at her throat. The silence between them stretched, thick with a new, volatile energy. The professional boundary hadn't just cracked, it had shattered on the marble floor. Clara realized in that moment that she was no longer invisible to him. She had witnessed the darkness of his world, and Ha-Jun, obsessed with the loyalty he saw in her defiance, was not going to let her walk away. "The girl who cleans the blood is finally starting to see the monster," he murmured, his face lowering until his breath hitched against her ear. "The question is, Clara, are you going to run, or are you going to help me find the man who left this behind?" In the quiet of the high-security penthouse, the silent maid was gone, replaced by a woman who realized that the only thing more dangerous than the secrets in her hand was the man now caging her with his body. The transition from the servants' quarters to the master's suite felt less like a promotion and more like a descent into a beautiful, gilded cage. Ha-Jun had been absolute in his command. After the incident with the flash drive, Clara was no longer permitted to sleep anywhere, but within the radius of his protection. His suite was a vast expanse of cold marble, shadow, and floor-to-ceiling glass that overlooked the shimmering, indifferent lights of Seoul. For 3 days, they lived in a charged silence, the air between them thick with the unspoken weight of the secrets she now carried. Clara spent her nights on the velvet chaise lounge at the foot of his bed, hyper-aware of the rhythmic sound of his breathing, her heart racing every time he shifted in the dark. The breaking point came on a Tuesday, well past midnight, when the city below was shrouded in a heavy charcoal mist. Clara was startled from a light sleep by the clinking of glass. She sat up, her hair a soft halo in the dim light, to find Ha-Jun sitting at his desk. He wasn't working. Instead, he was hunched over, a bottle of dark amber liquid forgotten at his elbow, staring at his reflection in the blackened window. He was shirtless, his broad back a landscape of twisting black ink that seemed to pulse under the low glow of the recessed lighting. "I can't sleep," he said, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that cut through the silence. He didn't turn around, but she could see his eyes tracking her in the reflection. "The ink! It burns tonight." Clara hesitated, then stood, her bare feet silent on the silk rug. She approached him with the cautious grace of someone nearing a wounded predator. As she drew closer, she saw the intricate detail of the tattoos, dragons, crashing waves, an ancient script that told a story of a life lived in violence. There was a raw, red quality to the skin near his shoulder blade where the newest addition, a jagged phoenix, had recently been etched. "It looks inflamed," Clara whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "You haven't been taking care of it." Ha-Jun finally turned, his dark eyes hooded and intense. "I have more important things to care for than my skin, Clara." He reached out, his hand hovering near her waist before he pulled back, a rare flash of hesitation crossing his features. "The ointment is in the bathroom. Apply it." It was a command, but the edge of steel was gone, replaced by a desperate, weary hunger. Clara returned moments later with a small tin. Her pulse hammered in her throat as she stepped between his knees. The scent of him, expensive sandalwood, tobacco, and something primal, swirled around her, making her lightheaded. She dipped her fingers into the cool cream and pressed them against the heated skin of his back. Ha-Jun let out a sharp, hissed breath, his muscles coiling beneath her touch. Clara didn't pull away. Emboldened by the silence, she began to move her hands in slow, rhythmic circles. She traced the line of a dragon's tail down the curve of his spine, her fingertips memorizing the texture of his strength. The tension in the room shifted from dangerous to electric. Every time her skin brushed against his, a spark seemed to jump between them, a silent conversation of touch that bypassed the barriers of their status. "You have a healer's hands," he murmured, his head dropping forward. "A waist for a maid." "I am whatever you need me to be, Ha-Jun," she replied softly, her hand lingering on the ink over his heart. He moved then, with a fluid, terrifying speed, catching her wrists and pulling her forward until she was caged between his thighs. His chest was heaving, the tattoos on his pectorals rising and falling with his labored breath. Up close, the intensity of his gaze was a physical weight. He looked at her not as a servant, nor even as a witness, but as the only thing in his cold world that felt real. Clara didn't look away. She traced the ink on his collarbone with her eyes, then looked up into the dark storms of his iris. The air was gone, replaced by a vacuum of wanting. Ha-Jun's grip on her wrists softened, his thumbs stroking the delicate skin of her inner arms. He leaned in, his lips inches from her ear, his breath hot and smelling of bourbon. "If you stay in this room tonight, Clara, there is no going back," he warned, his voice a ragged edge of a promise. "The maid dies and the woman belongs to the ghost." Clara leaned into him, her forehead resting against his. She reached up, her fingers finally tracing the sharp line of his jaw, her touch a silent acceptance of the darkness. "The maid died the moment you looked at me," she whispered. Ha-Jun groaned, a sound of pure, unadulterated surrender, and pulled her into the first kiss that would seal their fate. A collision of lace and ink that set the penthouse, and their lives ablaze. The morning light crawled across the marble floor of the penthouse, but inside the master suite, the atmosphere remained heavy and midnight dark. The previous night's surrender had shifted the tectonic plates of their reality. Clara was no longer just the woman who polished the silver, and Ha-Jun was no longer just the monster who owned the house. Yet, in the world of the syndicate, intimacy was a luxury that often came with a blood tax. Ha-Jun stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city of souls spread out beneath him like a conquest, his tailored black trousers sitting low on his hips. He was silent, his tattooed back turned to the room, but the tension radiating from his frame was palpable. Clara sat on the edge of the plush designer couch, dressed only in her white lace lingerie, feeling the weight of his silence. The room smelled of lingering sandalwood and the sharp, metallic tang of the danger that always followed him. She watched the way the sunlight caught the ink on his skin, the dragons and the phoenix, realizing that to love him was to embrace the fire that created them. "You saw him, didn't you?" Ha-Jun's voice broke the silence, cold and precise, devoid of the warmth they had shared hours prior. He turned slowly, his expression masked in a terrifying calm. "Yesterday, in the lower garden, you saw Jinho meeting with the men from the north." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She had hoped the flash drive was enough, that her loyalty was proven. But Ha-Jun was a man built on a foundation of betrayal. He didn't just need her love, he needed her total, unvarnished truth. He walked toward her, each step measured and predatory until he stood directly over her. The golden ambient light cast long, dramatic shadows across his chest, making the black ink of his tattoos seem to writhe. "Spread your legs wide, Clara," he commanded, his voice dropping into that low, dangerous gravel. It wasn't a request for pleasure, but a demand for submission. He knelt between her knees, his large, tattooed hand gripping her thigh with a possessive strength that left a faint mark. He leaned in, his face inches from hers, his dark eyes searching for any flicker of a lie. "I want to have a taste of the girl who thinks she can hide secrets in my house," he whispered, his thumb grazing the hem of her lace. "Did he speak to you? Did he offer you a way out of this cage?" Clara looked up at him, her eyes stinging but her gaze steady. She reached out, her fingers trembling as she touched the ink over his heart, the spot she had traced while he slept. "He offered me nothing I wanted, Hajun. He offered me safety, but I would rather burn with you than be safe with a coward." The mask of the Mafia boss flickered for a fraction of a second, revealing the man beneath who was terrified of the very loyalty he demanded. He gripped her chin, forcing her to look at him as he tasted her words, weighing them against his own cynicism. The air in the room was electric, a collision of absolute power and raw emotional vulnerability. "You are a fool," he growled, but he pulled her into him, his forehead resting against hers. "Because now that I've had a taste of this, of you, I will never let you go. Even if the city burns, you are mine." In that moment, the power dynamic shifted forever. The interrogation had become a coronation. Clara wasn't just his maid or his lover. She was becoming his partner in the dark, the only person allowed to see the man behind the ink. The atmosphere within the penthouse shifted from the heavy heat of passion to the cold, sterile tension of an impending war. Hajun moved through the vast rooms like a ghost of his former self, his silence more deafening than any shout. The defiance from his inner circle was no longer a whispered rumor. It was a visible rot. Jinho, once the shadow at Hajun's right hand, now walked with a brazen arrogance, skipping briefings and questioning Hajun's orders in front of the lower-ranking soldiers. The air in the syndicate was thick with the scent of a changing tide. And everyone was waiting to see if the king would strike or crumble. Clara, now permanently ensconced in the master suite, became the ghost in the machine. While Hajun managed the visible threats, she retreated into the digital shadows. With the flash drive she had scavenged from the vents plugged into a secure laptop, she spent her nights submerged in lines of encrypted code and shipping manifests. Her natural brilliance, once stifled by the drudgery of domestic service, ignited under the pressure. She worked in the dim glow of the monitor, her natural curls pulled back, her eyes reflecting the scrolling green text that held the power to destroy the man she loved. The breakthrough came at 3 a.m. As she bypassed a final firewall, the serpent in the garden finally revealed its true length. It wasn't just embezzlement or a petty power grab. Jinho had been meticulously documenting Hajun's supply routes, offshore accounts, and personal vulnerabilities, including photos of Clara herself, to package them for a rival triad based in Macau. The deal was simple. Jinho would provide the coordinates for a coordinated strike on Hajun's main warehouse in exchange for a seat at the triad's high table. The final file was the most chilling, a calendar invite for a final dinner at the penthouse, scheduled for the following evening. It was a Trojan horse, a gesture of faux reconciliation that Jinho intended to use as the signal for the hit. Clara felt a cold sweat break across her skin as she heard the heavy click of the suite's door. Hajun entered, looking weary, his tailored shirt discarded and his black ink tattoos stark against his pale skin. He saw her face, the blue light of the laptop illuminating her terror. "I found it," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It's not just a betrayal, Hajun, it's an execution." He crossed the room in 3 long strides, leaning over her shoulder to read the decrypted files. As he scrolled through Jinho's communications, Clara felt the temperature in the room drop. The man who had been her tender lover an hour before vanished, replaced by the predator. His jaw tightened, a vein pulsing in his neck, but his hands stayed perfectly still. He reached down, closing the laptop with a definitive snap, and looked at Clara with a gaze that was both terrifying and profoundly protective. "The serpent thinks he has invited himself to dinner," Hajun said, his voice a low, lethal hum. "But tomorrow night, he's the one on the menu." The transition from a hidden maid to a Mafia consort required a transformation that was as much armor as it was elegance. For the high-stakes gala at the Grand Hyatt, Ha-Jun had selected a gown for Clara that draped over her curves like liquid midnight, the deep silk contrasting strikingly with the warmth of her skin. Her natural curls were pinned back with diamond-encrusted clips, and around her neck sat a choker of black pearls, a silent mark of Ha-Jun's ownership. As they stepped out of the black sedan, Ha-Jun, dressed in a sharp obsidian tuxedo that concealed the lethal ink on his skin, offered his arm. His expression was a mask of cold, aristocratic indifference, but his hand squeezed hers with a silent, grounding intensity. The ballroom was a labyrinth of mirrored walls and predatory smiles, filled with the elite of Seoul's underworld and their corporate counterparts. Jinho was already there, moving through the crowd with the slick ease of a man who believed he had already won. He offered a mocking toast to Ha-Jun, his eyes lingering on Clara with a predatory glint that made her skin crawl. "A beautiful addition to your collection, Ha-Jun," Jinho drawled, his voice dripping with false sincerity. Clara didn't flinch. She leaned into Ha-Jun, playing the role of the infatuated lover, while her eyes, sharpened by weeks of studying surveillance data, scanned the periphery of the room. She wasn't looking at the guests. She was looking at the staff. The rhythm of the room felt wrong. Two waiters near the kitchen entrance weren't carrying trays. Their hands were tucked into their jackets, their eyes fixed not on the service, but on the chandelier directly above Ha-Jun's head. Clara felt the hair on her arms stand up. She remembered the decrypted files. The signal wasn't a shout, but a blackout. As the orchestra began a sweeping waltz, Clara leaned in as if to whisper a secret against Ha-Jun's ear. "The servers at 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock, she breathed, her lips barely moving. "They aren't here to feed us, and the electrical panel behind the velvet curtain is being tampered with. We have less than a minute." Ha-Jun didn't look. He merely tightened his grip on her waist, pulling her into a dance. "Stay behind me when the lights go out," he whispered back, his voice a low, lethal hum. A split second later, the massive crystal chandelier flickered and died, plunging the opulent hall into a suffocating darkness. The music cut into a jarring silence, followed immediately by the metallic schlick of suppressed weapons being drawn. Because of Clara's warning, Ha-Jun was already moving. He spun her toward a marble pillar just as the first muted thuds of gunfire peppered the spot where they had been standing. In the chaos of screams and shattering glass, the sanctuary of the penthouse was shattered not by a knock, but by the concussive roar of an explosion that blew the reinforced steel doors off their hinges. The luxury Clara had grown accustomed to, the scent of sandalwood, and the soft glow of golden lights, was instantly replaced by the acrid sting of gunpowder and the swirling gray of pulverized marble. Jinho hadn't just sent assassins. He had brought a small army to finish what he started at the gala. Ha-Jun reacted with the instinctive brutality of a man born for war. He had been in the middle of redressing his wounds from the ballroom floor, and now he stood in the center of the wreckage, shirtless and defiant. The intricate black ink of the phoenix on his back was smeared with fresh crimson, a deep graze along his ribs weeping blood onto his black tailored trousers. He held a sleek, silenced pistol in one hand, his eyes burning with a cold, predatory light that made him look less like a man and more like a vengeful god. "Get to the panic room, Clara. Now!" He roared over the shatter of glass as a volley of bullets peppered the designer sofa. But Clara was done running. She crouched behind the kitchen's marble island, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She saw Jinho's men flooding the hallway, their tactical gear a dark contrast to the elegant white walls. Ha-Jun fired back, his movements a lethal dance, but he was outnumbered. He ducked behind a pillar, his breath coming in ragged gasps, the blood loss finally beginning to sap the precision from his limbs. A shadow moved toward Ha-Jun's blind side, a mercenary raising a shotgun with a cold, focused aim. Clara didn't think. She only felt the sudden, sharp weight of the spare Glock Ha-Jun had hidden under the marble counter weeks ago. Her hands, which had spent years scrubbing floors and months tracing Ha-Jun's ink, now wrapped around the cold polymer grip. The weapon felt heavy, an anchor of death in her trembling palms. She rose from her crouch, her natural afro-coily hair dusted with white marble debris, and leveled the barrel. The world slowed to a single point of focus. She pulled the trigger. The recoil bucked against her wrists, a violent jolt that echoed through her entire frame. The mercenary collapsed, the shotgun clattering uselessly across the floor. Ha-Jun spun around, his eyes widening as he saw Clara standing her ground, the smoke curling from the barrel of her weapon. For a heartbeat, their gazes locked, a silent acknowledgement that the last thread of her innocence had finally snapped. "I told you," she whispered, her voice steady despite the chaos. "I'm not leaving you." Ha-Jun let out a low, guttural growl, a mix of pride and desperation. He reached out, grabbing a spare magazine from his belt and tossing it to her. "Then stay low and keep your eyes on the door. If we die tonight, Clara, we die as equals." The rain began as a soft drizzle, turning the neon lights of the Gangnam district into smeared, glowing oil on the asphalt. Ha-Jun moved through the narrow alleyway behind the shipping terminal with the grim finality of an executioner. He was a vision of controlled fury, his black dress shirt unbuttoned and fluttering, revealing the blood-soaked bandages against his ink-covered skin. In his hand, the heavy steel of his custom handgun caught the flickering light of a dying street lamp. Ahead of them, cornered against a locked warehouse gate, Jinho was a broken man, crawling through the mud. His once expensive suit, shredded, and stained with the filth of his cowardice. "Please, Ha-Jun, we were brothers," Jinho shrieked, his voice cracking as he hit the dead end. Ha-Jun didn't answer. He didn't need to. He stepped into the light, the barrel of his weapon leveling with Jinho's forehead. The hammer clicked back, a sound that seemed to echo louder than the city traffic beyond the walls. Ha-Jun's finger tightened, his knuckles white, his jaw set in a stone-cold mask of vengeance. He was seconds away from committing a murder that would be caught on the myriad of high-definition security cameras lining the terminal. A move that would invite the full weight of the Seoul Metropolitan Police and end his reign forever. "Stop." The word was quiet, but it carried the weight of a physical blow. Clara stepped out of the shadows, her hand gently but firmly coming to rest on Ha-Jun's tensed forearm. Her hair was damp from the rain, and her face was pale, but her eyes held a clarity that stopped the beast inside him. "If you kill him here, you lose everything," she whispered, leaning into his side so only he could hear. "The cameras are watching. The sirens are already 3 blocks away. Don't give them the satisfaction of a televised arrest. Don't let a traitor be the reason you fall." Ha-Jun's chest heaved, his eyes locked on Jinho's trembling form. "He tried to kill you, Clara. He tried to take my life." "And he failed," she countered, her voice growing stronger. "Death is too quick for a man like this. Hand him to the Interpol contact I found on that drive. Let the world see his crimes against the triads. He won't just be dead, he'll be a pariah hunted by every criminal organization in Asia. That is how a king rules, by making the world his cage." The silence stretched, thick with the scent of ozone and wet pavement. Slowly, agonizingly, the tension left Ha-Jun's arm. He lowered the weapon, the fire in his eyes cooling into a frozen, calculating intelligence. He looked at Clara, seeing the woman who had not only saved his life but was now saving his empire. He realized then that she was the only one who truly understood the price of loyalty. He holstered the gun and stepped back, allowing the shadows to swallow them both as the first blue and red lights began to reflect off the warehouse walls. The penthouse was silent again, but it was no longer the silence of a gilded cage. It was the quiet of a kingdom that had been purged and rebuilt. The scent of expensive bourbon and rain lingered in the air as Ha-Jun stood before the full-length mirror, adjusting the cuffs of his silk shirt. The bandages across his chest were a hidden map of the war they had just survived, but his face was a mask of absolute, terrifying calm. Behind him, Clara sat on the plush designer couch, watching the way the golden ambient light caught the intricate black ink of the phoenix on his back. She was no longer dressed in the white lace of a victim or the drab uniform of a maid. Tonight, she wore a gown of heavy obsidian silk that pooled around her feet like ink, her natural afro-coily hair framing a face that had seen the abyss and refused to blink. Ha-Jun turned, his dark eyes softening only when they landed on her. He walked across the marble floor, the sound of his footsteps echoing with a new kind of weight. He didn't look down at her, he looked at her as his equal. Reaching into the pocket of his trousers, he pulled out a small velvet box. Inside sat a ring featuring a rare black diamond, as dark and multifaceted as the life they were about to lead. He didn't ask. He simply took her hand, his thumb tracing the skin of her palm where she had held the weight of a weapon just nights before, and slid the ring into place. "The syndicate is waiting downstairs," he whispered, his voice a low, gravelly vibration. "They expect to see a master and his servant. They are about to see a king and his queen." They descended the private elevator into the heart of the grand ballroom, where the remaining captains and soldiers of the syndicate stood in rigid, nervous rows. The air was thick with the scent of tobacco and fear. These were men who had seen Ha-Jun execute traitors without a second thought, men who had whispered that he had grown soft for a foreign maid. But as the doors slid open and Clara stepped out beside him, her hand tucked firmly into the crook of his elbow, the whispers died a sudden, violent death. Ha-Jun didn't offer a long oration. He stood at the head of the room, his presence a physical force. "You all know the price of betrayal," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "And you all know the value of loyalty. This woman is the reason I stand before you tonight. She is the reason the serpent is gone. From this moment on, her word is my word. Her shadow is my shadow. You will bow to her as you bow to me." One by one, the hardened men of the underworld lowered their heads. It was a silent coronation, a baptism in the shared darkness they now inhabited. Later, as the celebration of their survival roared below, Ha-Jun led Clara back to the private balcony of the penthouse. The city of Seoul was a sprawling carpet of neon and shadow beneath them, indifferent to the blood that had been spilled to keep them atop their throne. The wind caught Clara's silk skirts and Ha-Jun's unbuttoned collar, the cool air a welcome relief after the heat of the ballroom. Ha-Jun stepped up behind her, caging her body with his own, his tattooed arms resting on the railing beside hers. He pressed his face into the crook of her neck, breathing in the scent of her, no longer just soap and lavender, but something sharper, more dangerous. "Do you regret it?" he asked, his voice barely a murmur against her skin. "The light you left behind." Clara leaned back into his strength, her hand rising to cover his, the black diamond on her finger catching the light of the city. She looked out at the horizon, where the darkness of the mountains met the glow of the skyscrapers. She knew the world would always see them as monsters, that their path would be paved with further secrets and inevitable violence. But as she felt the steady, powerful thrum of his heart against her back, she knew she had finally found the only home that mattered. "The light was a lie, Ha-Jun," she replied, her voice steady and resonant. "In the darkness, I can finally see everything clearly. I don't want a fresh start. I want this. I want us." Ha-Jun groaned, a sound of profound surrender and possessive pride. He turned her in his arms, his dark eyes searching hers and finding only a matching fire. He didn't need to command her to stay. She was the ink under his skin, the soul of his empire. Under the watch of a billion indifferent lights, they shared a kiss that was a vow, a promise of a forever that was dangerous, beautiful, and entirely theirs. The end. If you love this story, kindly subscribe to this channel and stay tuned for more.